There are few video game mascots more misunderstood than Ecco the Dolphin. He was originally conceived by Ed Annunziata, a keen science fiction and music fan who wanted to make a game about the way dolphins use echolocation to navigate the world around them. Serene, beautifully designed, with music inspired by Pink Floyd. The original 2 games on the Mega Drive were graphical highlights of the 16-bit console era, but they were notorious for their sharp difficulty curves. Ed was paranoid about kids beating his game in just one single weekend rental, so he deliberately made the game hard. Everything is out to kill you. Sharks, jellyfish, octopus, ravenous alien monsters that birth demon creatures that will then go on to torment your soul. This wasn't an underwater equivalent of a platformer, it was a secret survival horror game from before that genre was even formally codified. But as the years went on and the game's originally cutting-edge artwork looked ever more pale and jaded, people only remembered that obnoxious difficulty curve, the aggravation, which was held up in stark contrast to the cute and cuddly protagonist. Once true three-dimensional game worlds were commonplace, the underwater freedom of the dolphin against the two-dimensional map felt somewhat less impressive. Like many Sega franchises, Ecco skipped the Sega Saturn, but he was brought back in the year 2000 by a new team at Appaloosa Interactive, with a new reimagined sort of sequel, sort of remake, with the original creator now gone and having left the company. A new team set about designing a three-dimensional upgrade for the Dolphin, reusing some, or in fact a lot of the concepts and ideas from those original 2 games, but presenting them in a brand new light with a new story. Ecco must still adventure to save the world from invading aliens, the foe this time rather than the vortex, but both of them are similarly designed races that feature a terrible overlord queen, in a plot that uses glyph technology to power a time travel heist with branching timelines and history rewritten multiple times. The team appeared to have all of the ideas for what they wanted to do in place, but they seemed to struggle to hang all of the pieces together into a cohesive whole. In the end, science fiction author David Brin was brought on board to make sense of their disconnected ideas, and to add even more hardcore science fiction credentials, Tom Baker, the legendary Fourth Doctor, was asked to narrate key cinematic moments from the game's storyline. To have a Time Lord himself explain the rewriting of history was just too good an opportunity to miss. They eventually settled on a plot that revolved around humanity's interaction with nature. In the original, and therefore good timeline, dolphins reveal their sentience and knowledge to humans, and the 2 species have worked in harmony to build on and then beyond our planet. The enemy, the foe, was switched from an indiscriminate species that came to Earth simply to harvest and feed, to an interstellar nemesis encountered as the human and dolphin alliance spread through the stars. There are 9 levels in this world, but they flow seamlessly to present one continuously large area, one of 4 in the game. The other 3 worlds all represent alternative realities where man and dolphin went down very different paths. The next and most detailed set of maps show a world where humanity was left unchecked. We built and then used technology rampantly, flooding the planet with poisons and chemicals, waging war on each other until, ultimately, driving ourselves to extinction. In the dark and poisonous oceans, the surviving dolphins were weak and timid creatures, bewitched by the giant underwater machinery left by their human oppressors who are now long gone. And it's here where the game's strengths and weaknesses really become apparent. In an attempt to maintain as much realism as possible, the game provides only cryptic clues about what you have to do to proceed. Navigating the human machinery is possible, but it's arduous as each puzzle has one specific solution that has to be hunted down and discovered. Yet, the underwater maps are simultaneously too large and confusing, yet small and cramped at the same time. Far too often, you'll find yourself swimming in circles, confident that you've examined everything there is to see in a couple of small tiny rooms. Even back in the year 2000, resorting to online gaming guides and walkthroughs was a commonplace occurrence. A challenge is always welcome in gaming, but far too often this game stumbles across that line and goes from difficult to infuriating. But, challenge overcome, Ecco finds himself in a third alternative world, here where dolphins drove humans from the ocean and they rose to dominance themselves. Their response to our aggression, our technology and our pollution was to become militaristic and aggressive themselves. in homage to a level in the 16-bit era games, there are grand waterways above the ocean that Echo has to navigate himself around to resolve the civil war between his people's race. This area is one of the most visually stunning for people who overcome the challenge, but it is held back by the hardware of the consoles of the time. The draw distance, for example, means that you can only admire one small part of the hanging waters at a time. And when history is rewritten for the third and final time, Echo finds himself in a planet dominated by the alien foe. This area is relatively short and simple compared to the early areas. It mainly focuses on the battle between Echo and the foe queen, destroying her hatchery and swimming inside the giant monstrous to kill her from the inside. It's never quite as terrifying as the Vortex Queen from the earlier games, but conceptually, this is as disturbing as it gets. Like several other games on the Sega Dreamcast, Echo was praised at the time for being a breakthrough in 3D world design. It came out in that awkward period where polygonal games had been around for a while. Conceptually, it had been shown that they could work, but there were 1,000 design kinks to iron out. Purely because of its nature, Echo solves many of them, and yet it introduces one enormous new one. Unless you leap out of the water, there is no gravity. No obvious up, no definitive down. There's often no clear sense of direction at all. It's often commented on that designing an engaging level using three-dimensional space is harder than the equivalent space in a two-dimensional game. In the latter, the player has a narrower path to navigate, so the designer can place obstacles or hazards at key places to make them adjust their route. In 3 dimensions, the options are increased, so there's much more empty space, more room for the players to navigate. But this difference becomes minuscule when gravity is taken out of the equation. On the Mega Drive, Echo has 8-dimensional movement, but the levels were designed in quite a sadistic manner to control this. It was full of narrow corridors and tight passages. But in 3 dimensions, this would restrict the camera and make Echo difficult to control, so instead everything's opened up and made much larger. Echo was hardly the first video game to tackle underwater puzzles in a 3-dimensional game engine, and the Tomb Raider games had shown that impressive and conceptually challenging puzzle design could be implemented in this kind of environment. But the people designing for the Dreamcast game wanted you to feel like a dolphin. You would propel yourself forwards with the flapping of your tail, steer with your fins, and when moving at full speed, have all the grace and momentum of a ballerina at the peak of her ability. That meant large open spaces with doors, switches and air pockets hidden in increasingly elaborate fashion. The player in return has to ignore years of built-in muscle memory and adapt to a whole new control style. It's designed to be immersive, to make you feel like a dolphin, but it means that for someone prepared to invest in this experience, there is a joy in discovery few games that can match. But here, the difficulty creep rears its head again. As fun as controlling Echo is, and initially exploring the new underwater environments are, at first, the combination of an unfamiliar control scheme and unfathomable puzzles that require detailed exploration of your environment, combined with the knowledge that your air is on a fixed timer and you must return to air pockets to breathe constantly, these things all clash awkwardly. With no hands or feet, all Echo has are his sonar and his nose. So the solution, when you find it, is usually fairly simple, but also far less obvious than many players would expect. It all leads to the conclusion that aquatic creatures live a far more difficult and complex life than we give them credit for, and that mankind's presence, either as a friend or an enemy, can have a massive implication on all of our futures. There's always been a hardcore science fiction concept behind the Echo games, a theme of playing on our awareness of the natural world around us, and I'd love to see a new team with modern technology pick up and play with this concept again. Unfortunately, it won't be Appaloosa Interactive. Echo did well enough to justify a sequel, but when Sega closed its hardware business, they also cancelled a range of projects not far enough through development to justify continuing. Instead, the team ported this game to the PlayStation 2 and then diverted to a range of other projects, leading to several years of silence and activity from the studio. The next, and ultimately final game from the team was 2006's Jaws Unleashed, which took the engine built from Defenders of the Future and transplanted it into the ocean's most famous predator. What had seemed so impressive in the year 2000 was incredibly outdated just 6 years later, and the game's relative commercial success turned out to be a curse in itself. It was critically panned as one of the worst reviewing games of the year, and the Hungarian team closed its doors shortly after, whilst the Ecco intellectual property remained with Sega, who had little interest in the Dolphin, save for the occasional ports of their retro game back catalogue every few years.